in the debate, like I say, Michael Bloomberg was the biggest loser. At one point, he is asked about China. Now, Michael Bloomberg has an enormous investment in China. Enormous investment. I mean, in ways that, like, I don't think we can even imagine. And the coronavirus is bringing up an issue, and we'll talk about it in a bit, of, you know, we're going to have right now, there's a list that the CDC has, I think it is, of 150 antibiotics, prescription medications, et cetera, that they are concerned we will not be able to have access to because the coronavirus will have shut down production. And this is a big concern of a lot of people, that not only like that, you know, Matt Stoller is very good on this, that we have outsourced so much of our production to China that we are very, very reliant on them doing things that are in our interests when sometimes they may not be able to do that. And so here is Mike Bloomberg being asked a question.
Mayor Bloomberg, you've said that President Xi Jinping of China is not a dictator and that he is responsive to his constituents and that the U.S. must cooperate with Beijing. How far does that go? Would you allow Chinese firms to build critical U.S. infrastructure?
No, I would not. And I think the Chinese government has not been open. Their press, the freedom of press does not exist there. Their human rights record is abominable, and we should make a fuss, which we've been doing, I suppose.
Make a fuss,
but
I suppose.
Make no mistake about it. We have to deal with China if we're ever going to solve the climate crisis. We have to deal with them because our economies are inextricably linked. We would not be able to sell or buy the products that we need. And in terms of whether he's a dictator, he does serve at the behest of the Politburo, of their group of people. But there's no question he has an enormous amount of power. But he does play to his constituency. You can negotiate with him. That's exactly what we have to do.
Now, there's a story in The Intercept right now by a woman named Letta Hong Fincher. We've had on the show. And she talks about, the story is about what the Bloomberg limited partners threatened her.
Basically, it wasn't even her. Her husband was a reporter for Bloomberg. He reported this series on how the Xi Jinping's family had enriched themselves, essentially. They got credible death threats. And this was in a period of time where real death threats. A British businessman had just been poisoned by the wife of a senior politician. Read the article. That's the context. So she tweeted out in October 2012, now that the New York Times has gone public about the Chinese government pressure, I can admit that we've gotten death threats after the Bloomberg story on Xi Jinping. Within hours of my tweet, the original of my replies to questions, a Bloomberg manager called my husband and said, get your wife to delete her tweets immediately. And anyways, it goes from there. We can't summarize all of it. But the point is that Bloomberg did not have the back of their journalist and this family getting threats for doing this reporting. Quite the opposite.
Well, but it's not just a question of them not being they have their holdings are so huge in China. They are so afraid of offending the Chinese government that their lawyers were attacking this family.
And the Bloomberg ended up killing this story and basically said, if we run it, we'll be kicked out of the country. So.
Folks can check that out, The Intercept. So you've got Michael Bloomberg here. Now, this concept, he said this before, that they have a constituency. The idea that there is any leader of any country, like if you're a king, guess what? You have a constituency. You have to deal with the dukes, or you got to deal with the king of the north, or whatever it is. Like it doesn't.
I like this because it does show in general that it is actually kind of dumb to speak about singular heads of state in general. That is almost never the case. Like even in North Korea, you're always talking about more complex systems. So if he was just making a public service point of like, wait a second, guys, that's actually not how China works, and we need to be smart about it. That would be valid. But they're not autocratic.
Yeah.
They have a Politburo that manages their
It's the
state
point where
capitalism.
democracy is optional.
Well, which I think is quite optional.
He is conflating a democracy with having a constituency, right? And every single leader has a constituency. It may be just the billionaires. It may be just the people who have all the military, or it could actually be like the people who voted for them.
Yeah, that
if it's
seemed
a
to be
democracy.
what he was trying to imply.
He said this before. This is not the first time he said this. And
They do public opinion polling. He's equating that as well. And that's very Bloombergian. And when you look at the Chinese model, well, look, I mean, this is actually what the Chinese will put forward. They say, no, we're incredibly responsive. If you come out and you say there's a problem with garbage pickup here or something like this, we got you.
Right. As long as it's not you're actually looking for any type of power. We're just trying to provide you with services so that you do not kick us out of power if you get to the point where you could. So Bloomberg goes on, gets away with that because of how credulous the CBS moderators are. But what you will not get away with is saying exactly what Barack Obama said, that there are some countries who are autocratic who have achieved some success in certain areas of serving their public. Like, for instance, you could say that they're good with the garbage pickup. But the CBS will not let Bernie Sanders get away with anything like that, even though they've just let Michael Bloomberg get away with the idea that China, because Xi Jinping has a constituency, he's not a dictator.
Topic, Senator Sanders.
Can I say one word on...
It's in the same theme, sir. You've praised the Chinese Communist Party for lifting more people out of extreme poverty than any other country. You also have a track record of expressing sympathy for socialist governments in Cuba and in Nicaragua. Can Americans trust that a democratic socialist president will not give authoritarians a free pass?
I have opposed authoritarianism all over the world, and I was really amazed at what Mayor Bloomberg just said a moment ago. He said that the Chinese government is responsive to the Politburo. But who the hell is the Politburo responsive to? Who elects the Politburo? You got a real dictatorship there? Of course you have a dictatorship in Cuba. What I said is what Barack Obama said in terms of Cuba, that Cuba made progress on education. Yes, I think... Really? Really?
Yes, because there's no comparing those two
What Barack Obama said is they made great progress on education and health care. That was Barack Obama.
I talked to Barack Obama.
Excuse me. Occasionally, it might be a good idea to be honest about American foreign policy. And that includes the fact that America has overthrown governments all over the world, in Chile, in Guatemala, in Iran. And when dictatorships, whether it is the Chinese or the Cubans, do something good, you acknowledge that. But you don't have trade love letters with them.
That clip also not only did it point out that you are asking me a question about being sympathetic to autocratic leaders, and you just let that dude get away with talking about the largest dictatorship in the world as if it was a responsive democracy because there's a Politburo. It also featured Pete Buttigieg's like sort of verbal tick that he had the whole evening, where he was talking almost like as if Pete Buttigieg was in a separate debate, in a separate temporal plane that would sometimes, like, the streams would cross and you would hear him talking. No one was paying attention, and he thought that he was being statesmanlike, and he couldn't really get there.
It was like a TV show where the first time through the run of events, a character is like speaking very forcefully, and then you look back on it and actually he wasn't saying anything at all. He was just imagining he was saying
exactly. Right. It's one of those things like, this is what I would have said in that moment. And so that was, you got the whole sort of gist. And of course, there's Sanders again doing something that I think by now it's not as sort of shocking. I remember in 2016 when he did that in a debate with Hillary Clinton, where he actually like said the words like, we intervened in countries and was wrong. Like, that was shocking then. And now it's a sort of nobody.
Did we even
They were
poll
like, "How
when he
dare you?"
called Netanyahu a reactionary
No.
racist? I mean, that's historical.
What's also messed up about that moment, though, was they only asked the Jews about Israel and then just threw in Warren for to make it seem like Israel's a pretty significant issue for all the candidates.
Can I just go on my ballywick for 30 seconds, regardless of Bernie's got to calibrate a lot of things, and I think they're actually overall doing a decent job. But these aren't just historical. They're trying to dislodge governments in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba right now, and really your opinions on them are irrelevant to U.S. interference, which is extraordinarily aggressive, particularly under Trump and Pompeo. And so it's not just, I mean, the history lesson's usually important, but it's like when people like Buttigieg are posturing and saying, first of all, we don't want to talk about the Cold War. We'll get to that. It's offensive. But they're talking about regime change and coup mongering right this second.
Yeah, I mean, they brought a guy in from Venezuela to the State of the Union address, and everybody in the room, Democrats and Republicans alike, addressed the guy as president. And basically, they're the only people who do. Nobody in Venezuela refers to that dude as the president.
And in Nicaragua, those demonstrations, which are done in 2018, absolutely had a significant U.S. role. Does that mean that Ortega, it's always the same dynamic. And the one thing I will add that is actually pretty interesting, that if we're going to go, and there's legitimate criticism of both, but I would err on the side of cutting a break for an 11 million person island nation state that resisted U.S. economic warfare, assassinations, economic terrorism, an invasion to today, and gave people healthcare, literacy, and also helped end apartheid and liberate Angola. I would actually err a little bit more softly for them, more so than the largest state's capitalist country, or neoliberalism with Chinese characteristics.
Oh yeah, the moderators are absolutely unfair in equating Cuba to China. There's no question about it. Also, okay, I know maybe we don't need a history lesson as part of the debate, but if he wanted to, Bernie could bring up some of the terrible atrocities committed by, say, the Somoza dictatorship.
Yeah.
The worst things that you can think of. Raping nuns and children, things of that nature.